Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Todd's Podcast. My guest today is Dr. Brad O'Connor. He is the Chief Economist for the Florida Realtors, which is the state's largest trade association. We have over 243,000 members, was the last number I got when I was on finance. And as the head of the research department at Florida Realtors, he oversees the production of the association's wildly cited monthly housing market statistics, which we all rely heavily on, as well as numerous other economic and statistical research projects. His commentary on Florida real estate markets regularly appears in major daily newspapers around the state. This information and his analysis has been featured on many national publications as well, including Bloomberg, Business Week, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. Dr. O'Connor received his bachelor's degree in economics from The Ohio State University. He also earned his master's and doctoral degrees in economics from Florida State University. Two strikes right there against you, Brad. And at FSU is where his academic research chiefly involved the impacts of land use regulations on housing markets. Prior to joining the Florida Realtors, Dr. O'Connor served as an economic and statistical consultant for Walt Disney Company in Orlando. So welcome, Brad. I'm glad you're here. I know you made the trip over in some inclement weather, and I appreciate you braving the elements.
No worries, Todd. It's always good to see you.
So my first question is, what does it mean by The Ohio State University? I've never understood that. Is that hey, we're the shortest guy in the room and we want to increase our stature, or what does The Ohio State really signify?
You know, I looked into that at some point, but, they want to emphasize themselves as the flagship university for the state university system. And Ohio has a lot of great public universities,
Yep.
But the best one, of course, is the Ohio State University.
Well, I see where Miami is the Miami University, or University of Miami. So,
well, see, in Ohio, we have Miami University, not the University of Miami, where my brother went.
So, oh, really?
Yeah, which is a much older school, by the way, than the University of Miami. But, can we agree on, maybe not Florida State versus Florida, but, neither of us are, terribly fond of the Hurricanes. But
no, not at all.
I like all Florida schools. I respect all of them. I just respect the Noles a little bit more.
Okay, that's a much more generous position than I take, so I appreciate and applaud your effort there. So tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you went to high school, what you were like growing up, just give people a little sense of who you are and where you came from.
Sure. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, which is a mid-sized metro about an hour north of Cincinnati. We have a large Air Force base there, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, named after the Wright brothers, who are, of course, from Dayton and only spent a few minutes in North Carolina, even though they take credit for it. But they built the plane in Dayton, and we all know it. But Wright-Patterson is where my father worked. He went to ROTC in college and went into the Air Force as a lieutenant back in the late 50s, early 60s, and then he had an engineering degree, and he moved to the civilian side after he served his time is not the good way to put it, but
Completed his service.
And he kept working for the Air Force for over 40 years, and he was based in Dayton at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is the center for research for the Air Force. So
was he on the pilot side? Was he on the mechanical side?
He was an aerospace engineer,
okay.
So he would work on the designs of a lot of the fighter jets and other things that have become very familiar today. He was on teams that worked on the B-1 bomber, the F-16, the F-22, our current air superiority fighter. So it was a lot of fun at dinner with Dad because, you'd ask him how his day went, and he would smile and say, "I can't tell you that," yeah. Right? And then even in college, I worked at the base as a summer job, just doing some clerical work and some database work. And I would go have lunch with him, and he worked in like a 1 foot thick vault underground, like somewhere on base. So he had a really cool job that I don't know much about.
Was he on the construction side or the design side?
Design
side.
Yeah, he had an aerospace engineering degree. The Cold War was, generally not a good thing, but it was good to my family.
Right.
It gave my dad a very stable job, and they put him through master's degrees at MIT and Stanford. So my dad's smarter than me. I'll just tell you that right off the top. My mom had been an RN, a registered nurse, for several years, and But she was not working by the time they had me. I have an older brother, 10 years older than me, Phil, too, who's a marketing executive with Ford Motor Company. So that's the family unit I grew up with. Middle class suburban upbringing, pretty typical. And I just grew up there, and I loved it.
What'd you do in high school? Did you lean towards aircraft and mechanical? Were you sports? Were you debater, political? What were your interests?
Well, in school, academically, I was always drawn to math and science. So my brother takes after my mom in a lot of ways, and I take after my dad in a lot of ways. And my dad and I are quiet, more reserved, and we enjoy thinking. Just sitting around, solving problems like that. And so those were the kinds of things that I was drawn to in high school. Academically, but on the side, I played some sports, not particularly well. I played tennis, baseball, soccer, and I was a musician to some degree too. I played saxophone in the bands in school and piano at home. And by the time I got interested in girls, that switched to guitar. So
how'd that work out for you?
Well, ask my wife about the time I serenaded her after we almost broke up once. But
my dad played the French horn in the high school. He was quarterback of the high school football team and also played the French horn. And knowing my dad, he passed on his lack of musical talent to my brothers and I. My older brother's a little bit better, but just knowing my dad was a French horn player just kind of blows my mind. So you got your bachelor's from Ohio State, then you went to FSU for your master's and your doctorate. How did you pick FSU? Did they have a program specifically for the discipline you wanted, or did you say, hey, I really want to be in Florida?
It's kind of funny. Academically in high school, I would always get really good standardized test scores. But when it came to grades, everything was easy for me until high school. Then high school, I actually had to learn how to study for the first time. And I didn't really like it. And sometimes I get so fixated on something I'm interested in, I will ignore everything else that's important. And so that hurt my grades. But that mindset kind of carried over into college a little bit. Ohio State is an incredibly fun place to go, and not just because of the learning. So I like to think I got a great education socially for the first couple of years I was at Ohio State. But I wasn't that fascinated with what I was learning, and my grades suffered. So when it came to, at some point I actually quit school for a quarter, went home, worked as a waiter, and, just to kind of put myself through a shock and so, do you really want to pursue a college degree and get a good career, or, do you want to go into the service industry, which is perfectly fine, but you're not going to make much money, so I did that for a while, and I said, no, I think I need to find something I love, and I just hadn't found the major I love yet. And when I went back, I tried architecture. I'd always wanted to be an architect. But I wasn't sure how viable it would be. I went through my first majors were all business or science. I was a biochemistry major for a little while, which I could do the work, but I wasn't into it. So I go back and try to be an architect, and then I find out shortly after I'm doing that you think of architecture as maybe a mix of art and engineering, but in college, at least at Ohio State, it was 90% art, very little math, engineering.
Really?
And I just didn't feel like I was a pure artist. Like one of my TAs caught me doing math, for one of my designs, and said, "You should reconsider and maybe look at working with numbers instead." So I thought back to my economics class that I had when I was a business major, and I was like, that was actually kind of fascinating, like building mathematical models about the world, and it's a cool framework for looking at the world. So I decided to apply to economics programs. I actually got a part-time job in the Department of Economics at Ohio State, where I got to meet all the professors, and I thought, that's what I want to be. But I applied to a bunch of schools. My GPA wasn't great because my first 2 years at Ohio State, I didn't really, I goofed off, and I really put myself in a bad position. The second 2 years were great. Well, it turns out Florida State was one of the schools I applied to, and a few schools do this, but not many. They don't really care about your full GPA. They only look at your last 90 credit hours, which is what's in your major. And my last 90 credit hours were like a 4.0. So
we got to get this genius.
So Florida State grabbed me, and I got into a couple other schools too, like Kentucky and a couple other ones. But Florida State made me the best offer by far in terms of like what I would get to do, teaching, things like that. Teaching assistantship is huge because it covers your tuition. So
that was your job while you were in your master's and doctorate?
Exactly.
Did you do anything else? Or not that's not enough, but I mean, was that what you did to help defray
in
costs?
graduate school, you don't have time for anything else.
That's why I didn't get in or
It's
apply.
really tough. If you're getting a Ph.D., at least you're expected to live a monastic existence. So yeah, the teaching was enough of a burden already because you had to reteach yourself courses you hadn't taken in 4 years. And it's not like the teachers you have in high school who are well educated and prepared to come out as teachers. When you are a TA in college, you are thrown to the wolves from the get-go. There's no teaching courses that you take. You have like a 1 hour meeting and then suddenly you are a teacher in a college. And that's pressure, but that's when I learned one of the best lessons of my life, which is that when you are forced to teach something, that's one of the best motivators to actually learn it. Because if you go into the room in front of 70 kids and you have no idea what you're talking about, that's embarrassing. Yeah. So
you either rise to the occasion or get buried.
I try to use that with my kids, like to teach me something when I'm trying to motivate them to really learn something, but it doesn't work because they don't get embarrassed if they mess up in front of me. So I gotta figure out another way to motivate them on that way. But
so you just mentioned your kids. Do you want to brag about your
I have
4 daughters?
I have 3 daughters, and a boy.
Okay.
So in that order. So I have Daphne, Athena, Sage, and Locke, my son. So they range from 15 to 5.
Wow.
Yeah. And yeah, they are.
So the 15-year-old is the hardest one to get out of bed?
Well, she does have to get up earlier than everyone else. So that's. But it's also she's a teenager. When I was a teenager, I was not good at getting up at 6 a.m. either. So.
Yeah. When you were in Tallahassee, did you ever think, maybe politics is for me because you were up there, you were sentenced to 2 degrees at FSU, you're around state politics at a pretty high degree. Did that ever have any interest to you, or was it all academics for you?
Oh, yeah, politics is not, in terms of actually literally being a politician, that would never be for me, because I'm more... My mindset is more like, if I were to be involved in politics, it would be as a political scientist or, someone who looks at the data, things like that.
But never on the elected side.
But yeah, and not much of an interest for me there. I think there are people who are better oriented for that kind of work.
It's not for everybody. It's a mentality that you have to have and a temperament you have to assume. And, it's a different skill set than, perhaps you enjoyed. But I've had the opportunity to hear you speak many times, and you have been able to present data, sometimes dry data points, in a very interesting way that even someone with ADHD like myself can pay attention. Is this something that you learned? Were you born with this? Was this the skill you got kind of as a blend of your mom and dad, or is this something that, hey, I just got to figure it out because I got to be a presenter once I had the data?
Yeah, and I'm actually, I like to joke around and try to be witty, but I usually just come out with a poor dad joke when I try. But
they always work.
But it's not a skill I was innately born with.
But you have it now, and
I'm actually a pretty introverted person. I love having social contact for a while, but then I have to have my me time where I'm by myself. So public speaking is not, something I feel like I was born to do. Very few people are, but like I was just talking about, being thrown to the wolves, and as a teacher, economics is a course, if you're teaching it, where the vast majority of your students are only taking it because they have to. So when you are teaching economics at college, at a college level, you have to figure out ways to keep people engaged. And I taught off and on over the course of 7 years at Florida State, and that really helped me develop a lot. Also helping me was our first chief economist. My predecessor at Florida Realtors was John Tosillo, who was is an amazing, engaging personality.
Yep.
And I got to watch him from afar and see how he used humor. And even though we don't use the same style of humor, I'm very dry, and a lot of times people can't tell if I'm joking or not, which might be a problem if you're an economist. But once you know me, you get it. But it's something that I had to observe, and frankly, I've just done a lot of speaking at this point, and the only reason I can, figure out how to keep an audience engaged is because of just brute force experience.
Right.
And I try to mix in. I try not to read numbers to you or use economics jargon. I do make an effort to be my plain spoken Midwestern self.
And that's important. I mean, people don't understand how hard teaching to people who are not academics, how difficult it is. And I had 2 economic classes in college, and my 2 professors didn't know how to do it, or they didn't know how to communicate with me, and I struggled with it. But, you mentioned John, larger than life personality, could work the room. I mean, he didn't come in and sit in the back of the room and say, please don't come talk to me. He was different, and we were truly lucky. And the fact that you were underneath him and were able to observe his style, I think, has served you well.
Yeah, I remember one time he asked me to accompany him to a talk he was giving. I think it was in Fort Myers or that area, Southwest Florida. And the laptop battery died at the venue, and he lost all his slides. And if that had been me, even today, I would have fainted because I don't actually put words on my slides. I just show a lot of charts and pretty pictures. But it gives me the cue as to what I need to talk about.
Right.
But John just didn't skip a beat. That's still a skill I don't have. But
people that get up and just read their PowerPoint word for word are not good presenters, in my opinion, because I can read the slide. Tell me how to interpret your words. Tell me how to interpret this chart and what it means in the context that we're in.
But I live and breathe economics. And yet, if I'm forced to sit and hear a lecture on it for an hour, it's a lethal dose. You need to wrap in some humor and anecdotes and things that people can relate to when you're talking about this stuff. Now, when I'm talking to the realtors, it's great because not only is it like teaching again, but these students are actually interested in what I have to say. So
it affects their bottom line.
Exactly.
Really
so that I love that I still get that element of academia and that I get to help educate people.
Our real estate puts on a big land conference, or Dean does primarily through the land side of what we do. And he's got an economist that he brings in. And I heard him one time said, if you torture statistics long enough, you can get him to say whatever you want him to say. And
that sounds like Mark Dotzer, but it could be.
It could
be. A
be.
lot of us might have that.
It could be, but I mean, it's true. You can manipulate it and get to that point.
Todd's podcast is sponsored in part by SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate. Since 1996, the firm has offered unrivaled brokerage services throughout Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. With over 90 expert advisors throughout the region, our team has the knowledge and resources to help clients realize their most ambitious real estate investment goals. When you choose SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate, you have access to a diverse suite of commercial and land services, including forestry consulting, land management, auctions, property management, commercial leasing, and negotiating conservation easements. If you're seeking to invest in land or explore commercial real estate opportunities in the Southeast, contact us today at svnsaunders.com or call 877-518-5263 to connect with an advisor today. Once again, that's svnsaunders.com or by phone at 877-518-5263.
How do you approach data? Do you think of it as a static number? Do you have an eye on fluidity? How do you know when your data is correct, or is your attitude the data is the data and then I get paid to interpret it?
The data, if you've gone through a Ph.D. program in economics, you have definitely spent at least a year just cleaning data sets because as a research assistant for a professor, and I did that a little bit too at FSU for my dissertation advisor. When they publish papers based on data, everything better be right, because the favorite hobby of all economists in academia is to tear each other down. And it's a good thing too, because it means that, they're going to find all the holes in your paper. And one is the data quality. If the data quality are poor, you might be getting the wrong result. So it falls to the people who are writing the papers and their assistants to really develop a sense of, you have to make sure this data set is clean and correct. So that's something I spend a lot of time on at Florida Realtors. Even still, I can't as chief economist anymore, but when I was the research economist, I did a lot more of that. But occasionally, I yearn for, gosh, could I have a few hours where I don't have to make decisions and I can just clean data? Because that, for me, that's relaxing. But data is a big deal when you're in economics. We work with all kinds of different data. Even we were just talking before your show about the paper that my team wrote on the algal blooms down in Southwest and Southeast Florida that were really bad a few years back, and we did a paper at Florida Realtors on how that might impact home prices. And pulling in we not only had to pull in housing data, but we had to pull in data from the state and people who collect water quality data. And then we had to learn all about water quality science and what measures are used to determine water quality and all the different ways they do it, and then merge this data. So a lot of work that economists do is just working with data constantly. And most of the time, you're going to find that when you have a data source, even if it's really great and really comprehensive, you got to figure out how the sausage is made, because data, when you collect it, depending on which way you collect it, it's never going to be 100% accurate.
Right.
So there's always work to do in determining whether your data is valid or not.
So that kind of takes me into a question. As you hear national data, whether it's economic, whether it's real estate, and you hear the pundits say, the economy's doing great, or we're going to have a recession, or the economy's going to get better in June, or whatever. I can't imagine there's that many groups of data collectors out there getting and scrubbing raw data. And then it seems to me, hey, if you want to listen to one TV economist and they say this, if you switch the channels, you'll find another one that says that, interpreting the same data. I can't imagine that they're all going out creating their own independent data. There's got to be just a few data sources out there, I'm assuming, and then you put it through real estate economist eyes, and another may put it through auto eyes. Is that correct, or is that totally wrong?
Well, there are some data sets that everybody looks at.
Right.
For instance, most of the federal government data out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The Bureau of Labor Statistics produces the Consumer Price Index, which is our first big inflation number to come out every month, and that's why it gets the most attention for inflation, even though the Fed says they prefer the other one called the PCE that comes from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. That doesn't come out till later in the month. So the thing that actually moves the markets is the CPI, because that comes out first. That comes from Bureau of Labor Statistics. All of those jobs numbers every month you're going to hear, the U.S. created 300,000 jobs, which is actually technically not true. It's net 300,000 jobs. We probably created more than that, but then people left jobs or closed out jobs too. But
that's important.
But it's an important number, and that's one we all use. So if you're especially in macroeconomics, looking at the broadest possible lens you can on the economy, where you're looking at gross domestic product and inflation and mortgage rates and inflation, a lot of us use the government data, and if you go through an economics program, you're likely to know someone, at least one person who's gone off to work at one of those agencies, they're very dedicated. Economists like to be right, even though often we are not. We do try, and so those agencies are world class. If you look at other countries, they don't have statistical agencies like we do of nearly the same quality. And I'd throw the Census Bureau in there too. We use a ton of data from the Census Bureau, so a lot of us use that. When it comes to like industry specific data, then that's going to depend on what the industry is. For instance, we've been looking at and trying to figure out, get our head around the insurance issue in Florida, which we might get to later in this show. And the data there are hard to come by. A lot of it is trade secret data and it's proprietary. And so we don't have a lot of direct data we can look at and get a full picture of what's going on. But in real estate, we have MLSs and property tax data, and both of those data sources are very complete and robust and capture most of the market. And in that respect, we're lucky. So it really varies from industry to industry.
So that I do want to get into that, the real estate side, but and the data collection with MLS and property appraisers, but you hear the national economists on whatever news show you want to listen. Oh, housing's this and housing's that. But those have got to just be national numbers, and that's fine for
we're
an
all
overall
looking
picture.
at the same numbers, but it's easy to interpret what that means.
Right, but I'm concerned about Florida. I mean, I care about the rest of the country, but Florida is what affects me, and how Florida goes, how my business goes, and what happens in Ohio, nothing bad about Dayton or Timbuktu or wherever, and I hope they're doing well, but Florida's our own animal down here, and I'm more concerned about what you think is happening here rather than what the Texas guy or gal thinks.
Absolutely. So when it comes to the national housing market, there's really no such thing. Every local market is different, and sometimes like things like inflation or interest rates are going to affect all local markets in the same way. But there can be local factors like local employment and local economic factors that might make your local market go in a different direction than maybe the national trend. And that's certainly the case here in Florida. Florida, we're special in very many ways, and we don't always follow the U.S. trend. So if you're in Florida, it's good to keep an eye on whatever you're interested in economically. Look at the local numbers, state numbers, and then you can compare to the national numbers. But for here, my team at Florida Realtors, we produce housing market statistics every month using all of the MLS data in the state that is sent to us. And we not only produce a statewide report that says, here's Florida's median price and how many homes sold. We do reports for every local area in the state too.
Break it down by zip code,
or municipality, or county, or metro area. And we have 22 metro areas in the state. And we have over 240,000 members, as you said. Now, for most of them, do you think they're more interested in the Florida number or the number for their local market?
Well, their local market.
Right, exactly.
But Florida's still better than a national number.
It is. So we do both. But You're right. The data, people are usually a lot more interested in what's going on locally. Right. Just to echo the point you made. And it's because Florida often has things going on down here economically and that are different than the U.S. as a whole. We're able to provide that to members. The research group at NAR and run by Chief Economist Lawrence Yoon and my department, I think we've dovetailed together very nicely. I don't really think anyone was concerned that we were going to overlap too much at the beginning. But that's something I actually always keep an eye out for, is I follow what NAR is doing, and I feel like to make an additional contribution, it doesn't make sense for my team to replicate what NAR is doing if they're already doing it for our members. So we look for ways we can look at how Florida is doing that differs from what is going on nationally. Those are the things we kind of highlight to look over and emphasize when we're giving our talks and producing our research.
But I think it's important. You talked about you take MLS data, you take property appraiser data. That's why it's so important to hire a professional realtor that understands the local market. That's not just quoting statistics from Atlanta. Same thing on the commercial side, is it's all local, and you need that professional who understands and who has the best data available to them.
Absolutely, and we can't capture everything with data very well. That's why estimates don't work, as much as often as they would like, or or anyone else's estimates for that matter, who are just looking at a few data points. There are things that aren't going to be covered in the data. I always tell our members when I go out to speak to them, and this is the honest truth, that I often learn just as much from them by getting to see what's happening on the ground and ask them questions face to face than they might learn from me. In fact, I probably learn more from them because I only see some numbers, but I don't see, I don't have the sense of whether people's psychology has shifted on the ground level in terms of buyers and sellers until it's too late, unless I'm getting that kind of information for people.
But Florida Realtors did not have an economics department forever. And I'm not the only person, but I was one of those voices that says, hey, I'm tired of listening to New York saying Florida's real estate is bad. We need to start getting local. And that's when John was brought in, you were brought in, and we started this. And it was to say, give us some real-time data, what's happening in Bartow, what's happening in Fort Myers, what's happening in Jacksonville, and not just these bigger numbers. And I think y'all have taken that and created a phenomenal data set, data points that realtors can really use if they take advantage of it, and a much better thing. You had mentioned, you predict and you hope you're right and you think you're right. How good are most economists at predicting out more than 1 year? Because I know the Florida Realtors, and I'm not trying to put you on a hot spot, but I am. But I know that we had set a policy 10 years or so ago about something. They said, for the next 10 years, this is what it's going to be. And we were lobbying on that position. And it's like, well, how do we really know what's going to happen in year 2 through 10? And the answer is, well, we don't. It's our best guess. And
right. It would be nice if everything was so predictable. But, the world is a complex place. And we, economists, we do our best based on the information we have to kind of figure out what's going to happen. But it is very difficult, more than a year, even more than a few months for some things, to predict where we're going to be in terms of certain, economic phenomena. Interest rates, for one thing, are extremely frustrating and hard to predict.
right.
If you follow forecasts of those, I don't actually engage in direct forecasting of that kind of stuff, because I feel like if these Wall Street banks have 200 people on a job and they can't get it right from quarter to quarter, what chance do we have? But I'll take that. I'll look at everyone's forecasts and kind of, and oftentimes we end up somewhere between all of them.
Right.
But I often find it's more useful to not give people a specific number of where we're going to be, because you're 99% of the time going to be wrong about that specific number. But just give them a range, like of possibilities. Like, for instance, right now, I'm not really concerned about interest rates going up from here, but I don't know how long, going into next year, they're going to stay at the current level versus start falling. I know they're probably going to start falling eventually. I can't tell you exactly when. The data keep coming out that says the Fed was probably not going to do it because the Fed wants to wait for the job market to weaken, and those job numbers just won't weaken.
Right.
So I like to prepare people for different scenarios, because there is always going to be uncertainty. I will just say, keep in mind that it could go this way, or it could go the other way, or it could go somewhere in between. Plan for those different scenarios, because you don't want to be caught flat-footed. And, and I don't want to come out here and tell you I know what the future is. If I did, I would probably be living in the Caribbean somewhere right now. So that's the approach I take to it. It's a very difficult thing to do. We like to focus on our team looking at more what's happening in the now, because we can obviously see some very high quality data on what's happening in the now. And that gives us a good sense of where we might go from here. But I like to give people the information about what's happening right now, and the information I think that's important about what's happening right now, so they can come to their own conclusions too, because it's going to be different for everybody sometimes.
So I, as a consumer of your information, will depend on either what I believe, what I want to hear, and you'll either confirm what I'm thinking, or you will give me a opposite side and so then I still have to make my own decision. As we talked a little bit just a little bit about the property appraisers. Is there anything that the Florida Realtors can do? And I know you're not setting policy for us, but is there anything that we can do to help them try and get you more accurate data on a timely basis? Because they actually record sales. MLS, I think, does a very good job, but it's primarily housing, mostly single-family housing, doesn't really touch the commercial side, which I live on. Is there anything that you think we could or should be doing to help? And again, some property appraisers have more sophistication. They've got more resources. We are truly blessed in Polk County with Marsha Fox, who runs our property appraiser's office. I'm a huge fan of hers. But she's retiring. And, it's something that I'm concerned about is who's going to take over there.
Yeah, well, the data you can find in property tax rolls, which are public in our state, like in Texas, I don't believe they are, for instance. So they don't have access in Texas to the kind of data we do here. But obviously, the reason why these data are tracked to begin with is to establish your property tax base. So you need to collect information on the homes, how much they've sold for, and what features they have in order to assess, what their taxable value is. So there are lots of fields I'd like to see property appraiser offices track that might not be relevant to maybe, estimating the home price or the value of a home. But I always joke that, we should start taxing residential rents, which of course every realtor's hair would stand up if they heard me say that out loud. But I'm just joking. But tax it at like 1/100th of 1%. Just give the Department of Revenue a reason to make everyone track what the rent is at every home. Right. Because we don't have good rental data. We have great sales data. We know from the tax rolls and from the MLS data what everything sells for. But we don't know what you are renting your house out for on Craigslist or...
Do you ever talk to fee appraisers?
No, I haven't, actually.
I mean, they could be a data source. I mean, I know that we do as realtors is I will call and say, hey, I've got a medical office. I've got a 2,000 square foot, retail. What are you seeing in our market, with some other parameters? And they're always very good to share. And
we definitely have a great network through our own members and through folks like that who can provide us with that information. So it's not as though we're completely flying blind in terms of what rents are and we can see broader data. But to do some of the really intricate economic kind of modeling that we would like to do, then you need to find a data source. As in Florida, since we represent the entire state, it can't just be a local data source either. It's got to be a statewide data source for us. So because we can't justify just doing something for one corner of the state that we don't do for the rest of you. But
well, let's start in Central Florida from I-4 from Orlando to Tampa, and let's work out from there if we could.
Sure, yes. Work out geographically from Orlando to the nearby towns, which may or may not include Lakeland and Winter Haven.
It may not include it, but it should certainly start there.
Hi, all. This is Margie Grant, CEO of Florida Realtors, the state's largest trade association. Just had a great conversation with past President Todd Dantzler. Tune in and listen. It's called Todd's Podcast.
I talked to some folks and told them I was going to be having a conversation with them on the podcast. And I said, hey, you got any questions you'd like for me to ask Brad? And a few people sent in some questions. And here's one from Gary R. in Enigma, Georgia. And I didn't know Enigma, Georgia existed, but it's very close to our new office that we opened in Thomasville, Georgia. And Gary's a bit of a data junkie, and he said, since Florida seems to be outperforming the nation in housing and other economic indicators, how tightly should we be following the national data? And I think you touched on that.
It's funny, since the pandemic came along and we've had inflation and the mortgage rate shifts, those have been macroeconomic phenomena that are national in nature and international, really. A lot of governments in other countries have been dealing with the inflation the same way we are. So you look at Australia or Canada and their rates are going up too, and in Europe as well. So, that's I've been paying a lot more attention to national and macroeconomic data than I have before in recent years, because the years leading up to the pandemic, we were a lot more focused just on what's happening in Florida, our employment number, and how, by the way, it was Our employment growth was great before the pandemic, and it's been great, since after the pandemic relative to the rest of the U.S. So yeah, we're spending a lot more time looking at that. The national housing market number is important to look at. If you're looking at the national median sale price that NAR reports and the number of homes sold, it's important. But if you're just interested in homes in Florida, then yeah, you want to focus more on your local and state level data. Absolutely.
So I would think you look at a national sales data, you kind of just look at it as a trend line. You say, hey, it's going up, it's going down, and you just put that away as one of the factors as you come out with, not necessarily you as an economist, but us as consumers say, hey, at least nationally things are going better, and hopefully Florida's leading the way, and we're a little bit higher than their line or a little bit lower than their line.
The thing I would say is that Florida is interesting. For most real estate markets, we talk about population growth and employment growth being the big drivers for real estate prices and values. And that's still the case in Florida, but our population growth comes not just through births versus deaths. It comes from a lot of in-migration.
Right.
So the rest of the U.S. economy is important to follow, especially if you work with a lot of folks who come in from our big feeder states like New York and Illinois and now California, by the way, which wasn't a pre-pandemic thing, but is now. We still have Californians coming in at great
If you three
numbers.
states could start keeping more of your people for a while till that way everybody assimilates, we'll be
We're
better
even
off.
seeing we've seen an increase in people coming from Texas that hasn't gone down yet. So usually a competitor of ours for Sunbelt movers. So.
Next question's from this guy named Roadshow. Never heard of him, but he is from Tight Squeeze, Virginia, and he writes, "Hey, Brad, if I can only look at 3 data points to get a macro level understanding of the Florida real estate market, what 3 data points would you suggest? Because there's so much data out there."
Well, that's going to change depending on what the economy's doing. Today I would give an answer: you follow mortgage rates, you follow the inflation number that comes out, and you follow jobs coming out, and that's national. Because and why not the Florida one? Because the national number is what the Fed is going to enact its policy based on. So if the Fed has 2 jobs, one is to keep unemployment low, and the other is to keep inflation low. Unfortunately, it's hard to do both at the same time. When they attack inflation, they are going to most likely weaken the labor market. At least that's been the case in past cycles. So far this time, they've raised interest rates a lot, which should have slowed down the economy and reduced job growth, but it hasn't really slowed down. So that's why they're probably not going to start lowering rates until the job market starts to show more weakness in that data. So those are the 3 things that are really impacting the inflation rate. And as long as the inflation rate is high, they're going to keep mortgage rates high, not directly, but indirectly through their policy. So that's what's driving our market right now, as the mortgage rate is the be-all, end-all.
Are the employments number, are they new jobs, or is it a transference of one profession, one
When
go from
the
a waiter, you're out of the food business and you want to be in the medical business?
when the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports those job numbers, the one where 300,000 jobs were created last month, as would be reported in the media, what that really means is that our count of the number of jobs we had in the previous month versus this month has increased by 300,000. So that's a net change. There are going to be jobs that have disappeared. There are going to be jobs that have been created. On net, this many more jobs exist right now that are filled. There's also other jobs data such as quits and retirements and things and that come out every month as well. But the big inflation report is the one, or the big employment report is the one where they report the net change in jobs from last month.
Okay. Here's one from Melanie from Yeehaw Junction, and she asks, "What's the future of multifamily in Florida? Is this the future of what is going to be the most widely accepted form of affordable housing? Is the American dream dead?" You may not want to touch that last one in your position, but are we going to just have to say, "Hey, affordable housing is going to be multifamily housing"?
Not necessarily. First of all, let me say Yeehaw Junction, the name just brings a smile to my face every time I drive from Orlando to South Florida for work or pleasure. And is this a great state or what that we can have a place called Yeehaw Junction?
And they used to have a place called the Desert Inn right there, and I've eaten lunch there back in the day before you were even down here. So it was a great place.
Yeah, and probably not a lot of multifamily housing out there. But
No.
But so, multifamily is the solution in certain markets. We have a lot of geographically restricted markets. For instance, South Florida is pinned between the ocean and the Everglades. There's not a lot of room to grow out anymore, and so they've got to grow up. Even, Pinellas County, where St. Petersburg is, it's out on a peninsula. There's, very little vacant land left in that county, and it's our second largest metro. So, in those markets, you have to start building up a little bit, and otherwise things become pretty unaffordable. We're not in the situation that California's in by any stretch, but we are growing. We're a fast-growing state, and some parts of the state could start to feel a little California-like in terms of the density. But we have generally in our state been a lot more friendly to development than you'll see out in California.
Yeah.
Multifamily is the solution. In places, the price point in Miami has gotten really high. The price point in Fort Lauderdale, the price point in several other markets has gotten pretty high. It's hard. You have a situation where the folks who staff your schools and your fire department can't afford to live near where they need to be. So
it happens here in Central Florida and our Winter Haven, Lakeland, and MSA as well.
Absolutely.
So we're not immune.
And multifamily is one solution there. If you don't have any space to grow outward, or then you got to look inward a little bit, and we just have to accept that there might be more multifamily. Now, New York is a great American city that has existed for as long as our country's been around, and everything there is multifamily, right?
Right.
In the city. So, and yet it's still American, and it's still great, and it's still dreamy if that's where you want to live. Although, I prefer the sun, so.
I don't disagree. Here's one from a young lady named Mara Cruz from the Camp Mac area of Polk County, and which is out on the Kissimmee River, another great place. She wants to know if you see the demand for single-family housing starting to ease in the near future, or are these market dynamics here to stay where this demand is just always this strong? There's got to be something that's going to slow it down at some point.
We have a lot of what I'm calling latent demand for single-family housing right now. People still want the single-family home. And the only reason we're not seeing as many sales now as we did 2 years ago is because interest rates have risen so much, and the affordability issue. And that not only has made it difficult to afford, but part of the reason why it's difficult to afford is because no one's listing their existing single-family homes either, or less people were. Up until recently, we have seen a little bit of an uptick, but people were locked into these low rates and were hesitant to even list. So that said, that's the wet blanket on demand right now is the interest rate level. But there's so many other reasons to think that, if those were to moderate a little bit, the amount of demand you actually see in the market being acted on would rise dramatically. We have... the boomers are living longer than previous generations, and they're already larger than other generations to begin with. And of course, a lot of them have retired here to Florida. So we've had a huge bulge in our population in the 60 through 80 age range. We have a lot more people in Florida than we did even 10 years ago in that age range. At the same time, we have millennials, by and large, the children of the boomers, who are a very large generation as well, and they've come into their prime home buying years. And while millennials got a tough break and the great financial crisis happened as they were coming of age, now that they've reached their home buying years, the employment level is actually quite high for millennials, and they're doing well. And they're, most importantly, finally starting families. And that is really driving demand for single family homes. Unfortunately, those are the people who don't have any home equity built up.
Right.
And so they're getting hurt by these interest rates the most because they've got a full house to pay off rather than, starting with some home equity they can put towards a home.
So here's a last question. It's from a lady named Mindy from Wineglass, Montana, and she wants me. Let me read this.
Oh, no,
I'm not going to ask this question. Eli, did you not pre-screen this one?
I must have missed it.
Okay. Mindy, we'll deal with you off air. The last serious question is, how does Florida, and this one is for me, how does Florida attack the issue of affordability for all housing? You've touched on it a little bit. Do we ever see prices coming down Do we need a super recession that just collapses the market and we start over from a little bit lower level? I just don't see how some of these young folks can afford things right now.
It's tempting to think that a housing market crash would be good. If you're one of the people who've been outside looking in, right? But that would take an economic disaster, which I don't think would, be beneficial for a lot of the people who think they want that to happen. It's always an awful thing to go through something like we did. Not too long ago, the Great Financial Crisis, the Great Recession was awful for a lot of people. So as for prices, I don't really see a way we even get to something like that. What's different now than 10 to 15 years ago is that our supply is so constricted. We have so few existing homes coming onto the market, and we have more homes being built now than were being built 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, but still not enough to account for how many people want a home. And that it's that restriction in supply that's really keeping prices elevated.
Right.
And there's not a way I can see that we just suddenly get a burst of supply large enough to tank home prices.
So it almost sounds like there's got to be an increase or a decrease in the demand, which is population decrease or slowing of population increase.
And that's really not going to happen, especially in Florida where people want to be here. So the tough part of all that is that affordability is going to be, pretty difficult for a while. The only way out of it, long run, is to build more homes. That's how we get supply. There's not going to be some magic wand we can wave to just make all this supply appear. You've got to build your way there. So policies that encourage building, especially in areas where affordability is an issue, I think are the way to go.
We're kind of drawn to the close, and I want to ask you a few quick questions. We call it a lightning round, and it's kind of a, hey, what's your initial reaction? They're kind of lighthearted, but what's your favorite food? What do you enjoy eating?
Man, I like a good steak, and it really doesn't matter what the cut is.
What's your favorite
ribeye
restaurant?
if done right.
Yeah.
But
what's your favorite restaurant to get that?
You know,
somewhere here or up north?
Oh man, as I mentioned earlier, I have 4 children, and the opportunities to go to restaurants are, I work myself pretty hard, and so I get pretty tired. And the idea of taking all 4 of my children to a steak place, sometimes we go out sometimes, but I like trying independent steakhouses, but there are some of the chains that are pretty good. Like Ruth's Chris is pretty consistently good, and also a little pricey, so I don't do that very much. But
Christini's, I've always enjoyed Christini's. Nice.
Yeah,
Christini's is nice when someone else is paying.
But frankly, like during the pandemic, before the price of steak skyrocketed, I was doing a lot of that, just learning to testing different methods and grilling at home, and some of my favorite steaks are the ones I've grilled myself. So
awesome.
I love doing that.
How about movies? Are you a movie fan?
I'm not a huge movie person. It's funny. Like, I'm one of those people that can't stand the idea of sitting down for 2 hours and not doing anything. And yet, if you can, subdue me and get me into the first 5 minutes of a movie, I will sit there and watch it and love it. But for some reason, I'm hard to corner if you want to watch a movie with me.
Yeah.
But generally, I like comedies. I like to laugh, and I have 3 girls and a little boy, and that's enough drama for me. So, give me something to make me laugh.
How about music? Do you enjoy music? Are you musical? I mean, you had music.
Yeah, so I have a musical background, playing all kinds of different styles. But growing up, I liked rock music. I liked the alternative indie rock music in the '90s, and that's kind of where my tastes haven't evolved much since then. I don't listen to a whole lot of new music anymore. But
who's your favorite musical group?
So, oh gosh, I loved some of the post-punk bands like the Pixies. I don't like love songs. Like, it's not that I'm against love, but I just get bored with them. 99% of all pop music is love songs. So if you have something else to talk about, I'm willing to hear it. I like bands that tend not to just focus on the traditional themes. So anything to or you're doing something interesting with your instrumentation, anything like that. I've always liked, in the rock genre, Radiohead does a good job with doing some stuff like that. But I like a lot of different kinds of music. Just keep me interested.
How about sports? You a sports fan?
Like I said, I played, somewhat competitively, 3 different sports growing up, but baseball, in terms of viewing, baseball is my first love. I've been a lifelong Cincinnati Reds fan, and unfortunately, I've also been a lifelong Cincinnati Bengals fan. But we made it through the 90s, and we're alive, and we've actually got a lot to look forward to now, I hope. So
Good. So I'm assuming you remember the Big Red Machine. I watched them when I was in my early teens. And
my brother was old enough to remember it. I know everything about them. Like, if you're from Cincinnati, then 90% of us believe Pete Rose is innocent, and there's nothing you can do to convince us otherwise, even though obviously the evidence is very much against him. So
evidence, evidence. Who needs it?
But my wheelhouse was the '90 Reds, the ones that went wire to wire and won the World Series with Barry Larkin, Eric Davis, those guys. Those were my guys. My favorite player was Barry Larkin growing up.
How do you you talk about you need to keep your mind going. How do you unwind at the end of the day? I know you got 4 kids and they probably attack you when you get home and, you're the jungle gym set for them and they just command your attention. But how do you put your mind in neutral, or do you ever get a chance to do that?
Yeah, I would love to say I do get a chance to do that. But yeah, you're right. It's a time in most people's lives, if you have children the age that I do, that you are not able to do all the things you used to do on your spare time.
But there is no better time right now than what you're going through with all your kids at that age.
That's what they say, and I'm probably going to look back and think that, but we'll see. For right now, I'm not so convinced. But so maybe if I get an hour or 2 at night, if I can keep myself from working, because economics was a love before it was my job. So I read constantly, not books so much more anymore as just, news and economics papers and things like that. But that's not, I try to not do that every night because you don't want to burn out. So I like crossword puzzles, just something simple where I can sit there in the quiet, crossword puzzle, give me the New York Times crossword puzzle, I'll do it. And I like doing that, just little puzzles like that. That's lately how I've been kind of just spending my free time.
We're pretty much at the end. Is there anything that I asked you that you wish I hadn't, or is there anything that you wish I had asked you that you really wanted to get across, a point you wanted to get across?
Well, I'm not going to tell you if there's anything you didn't ask that I don't want you to ask me.
Well, Eli can cut anything that we need to. There's a few questions from some salty people on here that I didn't read.
I think we've been pretty comprehensive today, Todd.
Good. Well, I want to thank you for coming in today. You braved the weather. We've heard some thunder in the background, and maybe Eli will be able to edit that out. You've told us some opinions on the Florida real estate market, and you've given us some insight of how economists think about using data, and I appreciate that because I've always been skeptical when there can't be 1,000 different people collecting data. There's got to be a couple, and then everyone looks at it the way they need to look at it for whoever's paying them or they're employed by. So I appreciate you coming in and taking the time to do that. And Brad, thank you for coming in. And remember, everybody, Wang Chung tonight. Hey, everybody, I want to thank you for listening to Todd's podcast. This has been your host, Todd Dantzler. If you enjoyed today's episode, I hope you will join us next time where we talk to Dr. Randy Avent, the president of Florida Polytechnic Institute, and we will be talking about applied research, the creation, the growth, and the future of Florida Poly, what some of his plans are, where he likes to eat barbecue. So I hope you'll join us with the episode with Dr. Randy Avent. As always, don't forget to rate, review, follow, and subscribe to Todd's podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions for me or any suggestions for future guests, please call or text our number at 863-288-0944 or visit todddantzler.com. Again, that's 863-288-0944 or visit my website, todddantzler.com. I look forward to hearing your questions and feedback, and please take care.